Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so my name is Jason King, and this is CPS Web Tips for Winshuttle. Just a few housekeeping items. Please mute your phone. I think we automatically mute, but just in case, please mute, just so we don't have any background noise. If you have a question while we're going through the presentation, please type it in. I'm monitoring that myself, so if I don't see it right away, we'll definitely circle back to it as we move through the presentation when I see those questions. And then as far as polls go, I don't have any polls in this particular presentation, so we shouldn't need to worry about polls. Just a little bit about me. I've been an SAP user, both just as a business user and a technical user for over 16 years now. Been using and teaching people how to use Winshuttle for over 9 years now, and joined CPS back in November of 2016. Prior to that, I was in industry at Johnsonville Sausage, and I had led the Wisconsin Winshuttle user group. So what we're going to cover today, or our topic today, is Composer Advanced Troubleshooting. Okay, so sometimes when we're building a Composer solution, we run into issues and it's not easy to figure out what they are. So I wanted to provide a few tips and tricks to more effectively find out what's happening in our solutions and how to correct them. So what we're going to cover is utilizing xPaths for our fields to get values and set values within the browser console window. We're also going to talk about how we can look at JavaScript code for rules to do a number of different things, but mainly just to test the rule without needing to redeploy our entire solution. We're going to take a look at Blackbird logs and the information that can provide for us, and we'll also cover the workflow admin tool, because sometimes when we're testing our workflow, things don't flow. So we need to go into the workflow admin tool, look at our background jobs, and figure out why we're stuck. So the first thing that we'll cover is the xPaths and using F12 in our browser. So why is this useful? Sometimes the value that we see on the form is not the value that's technically stored in the field, right? We might have a display value, like, for example, for the plant field, it might say 1000-New York for our New York plant. But the value that's actually stored in the field is 1000, right? So we need to know that, because we need to know what's being sent to the Winshuttle script that's going to load data into SAP. And it's important as we're debugging and testing these things to understand what's actually being used as the value. Sometimes the field that we need to understand a value for or know the value for isn't even shown on the form. It might be a field that's more like a helper field that's kind of in the background. We need to know what that's set to, or what rules may be triggered from that. And sometimes we want to trigger a rule or do something of that nature that will allow us to test, and we can't change the value of a field because it's disabled. Sometimes we can use this particular trick to be able to trigger some of those rules when we want to test or troubleshoot something. So this is just a screenshot of getting the xPath and then also going into the debug window. But what I'm going to do now is actually exit my slideshow, and I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly what we're talking about. So when we talk about getting an xPath, right? So every field in the form has what's called an xPath. It's the path that's listed in the form XML. And what we can do is we can right-click in Composer on the field that we want to get the xPath for, and we can click Show xPath. We can then copy the xPath, and then when we go to our form in the browser, we can press the key F12. Okay, and what that does, and I just have to move this screen that just popped up over to our window that I'm sharing. Okay, what that does is that allows us to get into some of the dev tools that are offered within the browser. Specifically, we want to be on the console window when we do this, right? So if I wanted to see what the value was for the field that I clicked on, so let me just jump back, okay, to my Winshuttle form, right? So in Composer, I clicked on the reference alternative BOM field to get that xPath. So if I want to know what the value was in my form, right now it's blank, right? But if I couldn't see that, or if I wanted to figure out what that was, what I can do is come into the console and just use this simple command. It's $form.getValue, open parentheses, apostrophe, paste in the xPath, apostrophe or single quote, close parentheses, and then I just hit enter. And then it's going to provide for me what the value is. Right now it's blank, but again, we can use this for any field within our Composer solution. So for example, right now we picked a field that's on the form. If I had come over to my form data and selected maybe a field, any field that's not on the form, I can do the same thing. I can just go through my form data tree, I can right click, show xPath, copy, go back into my console, and I can type in my command. Now one thing to note too is if I press the up arrow key, it will go to the last entry that I put in here. And then I can just highlight the xPath and replace it. And I can get my next xPath. Again, that field's blank, but if it wasn't, it would provide a value. So that's how we would determine exactly what value is in the form. Another thing that we could do, for example, is do a set value. Okay, so I could type in $form.setValue. Then I could do my single quote and then paste in my xPath, single quote. And then here is where we would want to put a comma, and then in double quotes the value that you want to change that field to. So I'm actually going to not change that field because it's not displayed on the form. So if I press the up arrow, that's the last item I did. If I press the up arrow again, it goes to the previous item. So it kind of circles through your history. So what I'm going to do here is just simply change my G for getValue to an S for setValue. And then in here I'm going to put a comma. And then I'm going to set this field to 0, 1. Okay, and then I need my close parentheses, and then I hit enter. And I get this message that says undefined, and that's okay. That's actually all right. What we'll see is when we go back to our form, it's actually now set the value to 0, 1. Okay, so that's a way that I could set a field. Now, had this field been disabled and my rule is on this field, and I need to test my rule, I don't want to have to go through the whole process of retrieving my information, using a query script. It takes time. I want to just be a little bit quicker about getting that rule to fire or trying to fire that rule. I could use that set value to set the field and then also ultimately trigger the rule. Okay. So that's how we can utilize xPath and then that F12, that debug or that developer tools within the browser to get actual values that are in the form, that are stored in the form, when they could be different than what's displayed, they could be hidden, and also to set field values when we need to test or troubleshoot. One other thing that I do want to point out is that not only can you view JavaScript that way, or view the values that way, but if you happen to go into your process SharePoint list, you have all your processes listed here. If you simply just click on the link to any given process, that'll bring you into the form XML, And from here, if you do a search, so hit Control F, and we just want to do a search, let's say for material number, that's going to show us all of the different fields in our XML that have material numbers. So I can find the exact value that way as well, right? So I can scroll down until I get to the name of my field. Which, you know, it could be any one of these. Doesn't really matter, but what you'll find then is between these little caret icons, it's going to tell you the value of the field. Okay, so it's just another way that you can find the exact value that's being stored in the field versus what may be displayed on the form. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is using Rule Wizard JavaScript. Okay, so why would we want to do this? Well, sometimes we make a tweak to a rule. It might be a very small tweak, and we want to test it to make sure that it works before we redeploy the entire solution. Some solutions can get pretty big, and when you redeploy, it can take several minutes to do so. And then just to find out that the rule doesn't work, and it's not ideal. Sometimes you might be at a task within the workflow where you need to test the rule, and you're on that particular view of the form, and it might take a while to get there through the workflow. So sometimes it's just nice to be able to test the rule without redeploying the entire solution. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you need data from previous views or previous tasks to be populated in order to get a rule to work, and you know, then this particular scenario might not be ideal, but most of the time you can use that technique. Another way that that's useful is when you want a rule to fire. Maybe you don't have all of the criteria to trigger the rule, but you do want to trigger the rule because in this particular scenario you might need to see what will happen, right? So you can copy the JavaScript code for the rule and paste it into that console that we just used, and then the rule will execute. Okay. Another nice thing that you can do is you can build JavaScript functions by utilizing the code that's generated by the Rule Wizard. I'm not going to demo that today, but just a little teaser, December's WEBtips is going to be all about that particular topic. So when I talk about you know, using the Rule Wizard JavaScript, I'm talking about, you know, going into your existing rules on a particular field. You right-click on the little ellipses button, and you click View JavaScript Code. That's going to go ahead and open up the rule, the JavaScript behind the rule, and then you can copy that and paste it into your console window. So I'll demonstrate that. Okay, so if I go into my Composer solution and I just click on a rule, okay, I can edit the rules. That's going to open the rules up over here in the side panel, and then I can click on this little ellipses button and click View JavaScript Code. From here, I can copy the code. I'll hit Cancel, and then I can go into my form. Right? I can press F12. Now I've already done that, so I have my console window open here. I can paste the rule, the JavaScript code for the rule, into the console window and hit Enter. Now this particular rule does have an issue for something that I'm going to show in a minute. But when I execute the rule, it would then execute in the form. Probably a better example, if I just jump back real quick here to Composer, would be the second rule, right? So I wanted to disable the comments, okay, if this field changes. So again, clicking the ellipses button, view the JavaScript code. I'm going to copy that code. I'm going to go back to my form and then into my console, paste the rule, and hit Enter. Okay. So now when we go back to our form, what we will see is comments field is now disabled. Okay. And another nice thing that you can, or another technique really that you can do is, when you start to get into, playing with these things, you can start to change, mess around with the commands here, right? So maybe I want this to enable. Okay, now I want to try that. Right? Maybe I wanted to tweak the rule here before I go put it into my solution. So now I can go back to my form and I see, oh, comments are now enabled, so that's working. So now I know, without changing this field, that when this field changes, that rule would fire and it would do what I want it to do. Okay? So that's one thing you can do with the JavaScript that was generated by the rule wizard. Okay? All right, so let me jump back to my presentation. Okay, so then the next thing that we can do to help identify issues that we might be having with our form workflow is we can look at the Blackbird logs. Okay, so why is this helpful? Sometimes you have everything set up right for one rule, but maybe a rule previous to that rule is throwing an error within the solution, and any rule that's triggered after that is not firing for whatever reason. Okay, so that's another thing that can happen to us. So we need to use Blackbird. We can help narrow down the location of where that issue might be occurring so that we can fix it. Okay, so then I will jump into, so this is what the Blackbird log looks like, and we'll see that here because I'm going to exit and actually demonstrate that. So if I'm on this screen and I've gone through and I've maybe filled out some data and I expected something to happen here, right? When I change this reference material, I expect that it's going to filter some repeating content and it's going to disable my comments. Okay, so let's just take a look in Composer at what the rules are. So on this particular field, this reference alternative bill of material field, I have a rule that runs on form load and it should filter repeating content. So there's a table I have on the screen that it should filter if it happened to have data. And then it should also disable comments whenever the field changes. Okay, so that's what I would expect to happen when I change this value here. Okay, so if I change that to 02, for example, and I tab off of the field, I would expect that if I had data here, it would be filtered. Okay, and then I would also expect to see that my comments are now disabled, regardless of whether it filtered data here. This rule should have fired, but it didn't, right? Because we can clearly see that I can type in the comments field. Okay, so what we can do in this case to figure out maybe why this didn't happen the way that we thought it should, we can hit Control F12, and that opens up that Blackbird log. Okay, and the first thing that you'll notice is I have some messaging here, and it says error executing rule, syntax missing after argument list. Well, I don't necessarily know what all that means, but what I do know is I have an error happening on a rule, and that error is preventing subsequent rules from running. Now, the nice thing about Blackbird is, you have all these little buttons up here that can help filter, right? So when you first load a form, and I'm going to go ahead and actually do this right now. I'm going to clear this and I'm going to reload my form. Okay. Because I had the console window open, by the way, it just immediately went into that, so I'm going to close that for the time being and let the form reload. Okay, so now I have a clear form. Okay, and if we hit Control F12 right here, we're going to see all of the rules and different things that occurred to load that form. So it's a big list of items. Okay, if I wanted to see if I just wanted to see errors, I could uncheck all these other items and it's going to show me just the error. The problem with that is I see what the error was, but I have no idea what field it pertains to. Okay, so that's one thing you got to keep in mind as you try to filter and figure out what happened. You need to have the this little green checkbox, the message type for just regular messages shown, because what that's going to show you is every time the form while it's loading is executing a particular rule, right? So it says executing rules on this field, rules successfully evaluated. And as I scroll down, I'm going to see running rules defined on F alt bomb reference search, and that's where the error occurred. Well, it just so happens that that's this field right here. So I know that my issue is now happening on this particular field. So if I go look at my rules, I say, well, I don't see anything necessarily wrong, but a lot of times if you go into a rule and you view, even though you didn't write the JavaScript code, you let the rule wizard generate it. If you view it, sometimes you can see an issue here, okay? So if you wrote the rule, you can see that little X, or you can view the JavaScript code, or maybe what you're doing is just looking and saying, oh, well, this isn't working because I'm pointing to a field I deleted earlier, or something to that effect, right? But ultimately what's happening is the solution is executing this rule right here, this temporary rule for WEBtips, and it's failing, it's throwing an error. So then it's not executing the rule for temporary WEBtips after error, right? So if I were to delete this rule, redeploy my solution, this rule would fire without any issues. So this is the rule I have to correct, okay? And we found that by looking through the Blackbird logs. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the presentation. So, the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about as far as tips and tricks for troubleshooting would be the workflow admin tool. Now, I'll say right off the bat that not everybody will have access to this, but this is something that you could potentially work with your Winshuttle administrator on if you need to have a look at something. But as you're going through and developing a solution, if your workflow is stuck somewhere and it's just sitting at a particular plugin or a particular task for some unknown reason, we can go in the workflow admin tool and take a look at why that might be happening. Okay, so this is what the workflow administration tool looks like, and what we want to do is we click on the button that says manage background jobs, because that's where we're going to see the information related to all of the different jobs that have to run to move our workflow from start to finish. Okay, so I'm going to jump out and demonstrate that. Okay, so this is the workflow administration tool right here. Okay, so then what we would do when we come in here is we would click on background jobs, and that will take us to this screen. Okay, when we get to this screen, we can filter the results, right? There might be tons of results. You could see 10, 15, 20 pages here of results, depending on the period that you're looking at. You can filter by the period, so you could do a week, a month, last 3 months, last year, or everything. The type, these are all the different types of jobs that could potentially be running within the workflow. And then the status. Okay, so right now I'm looking at the last 3 months and the status of error. So I noticed that I had a Winshuttle update that errored out, and I want to take a look at the details of that job. Okay, because I noticed that my process is stuck, and I don't know if this job is related to my particular request that's stuck or not. So the way, before I even open these details here, I would click on this link and open the details. But before I even do that, one thing that I really want to make sure I do is get the item ID of the particular request that I'm looking at. So I have a request that I submitted in my form, and it's going through the workflow and it's stuck. I need to find the ID of that request in order to be able to know if this particular job even is related to my request. So the way that I do that is I go into my SharePoint list for my particular process, okay, and I want to find the item ID. Now, the standard Winshuttle SharePoint list does not, by default, show the item ID, so I would have to go to List, and then I would have to modify the view, and I'd have to scroll down in all the columns and find ID, and I would check that. I typically like to make that the first column, so I could change that to the first column, and then I would click OK. And now I can see my item ID. Okay, and let's say my process was ID number 5, right? So I got number 5 here. That's the one that I was working on, and that's the one that I have that's stuck. Okay, I don't know why it's stuck. I need to find out where it is and what happened. Okay, so now if I go back to my my background jobs, right? This is the first error I saw, so I would right-click on this and click Open in New Tab. You could just click on it, and what will happen is it will open those job details in this same window, and then when you hit the back button, it will clear your filter. So anything that you know, as you were going through trying to look at each one of these, it will clear your filter, so you'd have to search again. That's why I recommend right-clicking and opening in a new tab. Okay, so you right-click, you click Open a new tab pops up, and you get all this information. A lot of it's code, a lot of it might not make sense, but there are key things that we're going to be looking for. You know, what's the list name? Is this even related to my process? And then if it is, great. Is this related to my particular item? So I'm looking for item ID, and we find right here item ID, and the value is 5. And lo and behold, that was the item that I was working on. So I know that this particular error job is related to my solution and the request that I have that's stuck. So then I can read through all this gobbledygook and try to figure out, okay, what happened. So it says an error occurred while calling the service, target invocation exception has been thrown by the target of invocation, blah, 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 blah. Basically what it's saying is open connection failed. So I had some kind of connection issue, and in this case it looks like name or password was incorrect to log into SAP. Okay, so when you see this RFC login failure, it means whatever credentials I was trying to use to log into SAP were incorrect. So now I know I might have to go back and update my auto logon credentials. I might have to update my own credentials if, you know, for whatever reason, my test system, maybe I haven't logged in a while, my password's expired, whatever that might be, you know, but I can at least move forward and take some sort of corrective action based on that error. Okay, so that's background jobs and how you can utilize that to figure out when you might have a workflow stuck while you're going through and testing. Okay. So those are the key things that I wanted to bring up and talk about and kind of just show everybody. I hope that was somewhat helpful and at least new if you're on the line and paying attention, and not redundant. So I hope you got something out of that. If there are any questions, I don't see any right now, but if there are any questions, if you wanted to type those in, we could take those now. And I'll just wait just a few seconds to allow folks to type in questions if you want to. Okay, I don't see anything coming in, so we'll keep moving. You know, we have sessions coming up from Clear Process Solutions that I just want to make everybody aware of. The next web tips will be August 15th, and the topic is going to be Winshuttle Composer, change request forms, and delivering a smarter solution. So look forward to that coming up. On Thursday, October 24th, there will be a Lean Utopia. So there'll be discussions and demos talking about emerging digital process transformation technologies. So, you know, that could be a really great event to attend if you're looking to improve processes at your company. And then additionally, if you have any ideas for web tip topics that you want to see, please email them to info@clearprocesssolutions.com, and we will take a look at those things and try to build sessions around the things that you guys want to see. Okay, so that's that. And then just a reminder that Clear Process Solutions does offer a service called Solution Care. So as you look through all of the different things that come along with your Winshuttle maintenance that you automatically get from Winshuttle, there's some great things there, but we augment that with other services too that Winshuttle maintenance doesn't cover. So it's something to think about. If you are interested, please contact us by visiting clearprocesssolutions.com to inquire on how to get started with something like this. Okay, and this is the Clear Process Solutions contact information. I'll leave that up there for a second for anybody that would need it. And I'd just like to personally say thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope that you were able to take away at least one nugget from this presentation that you can use in your day-to-day jobs that would help. And look forward for more web tips coming soon. And again, thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.